The second is Surah Al-Safat. The third is Surah Al-Sad. And the last is Surah Al-Zumr. The first surah that's going to be recited, we're going to be covering the vast majority of this chapter, the underlying themes. The first thing that Allah speaks about in the chapter of Yasin is the oneness of God and the divine message that each prophet was sent with. And that was to direct people towards the worship of one God and the disassociation from idol worship. And also to guide people towards ethics, morals, etiquettes and mannerisms. And Allah speaks about this in quite some depth towards the beginning of this chapter. Then very swiftly Allah narrates to the people a story. And it's a very uncommon story. It's not heard of very often. And this is the story of the people of the village that's in modern day Turkey today. And these were a people who had 3 separate messengers sent to them. And these messengers aren't very well known. Their names haven't been explicitly mentioned. These people were reported to have been the disciples of Jesus. And these people persisted in disbelief and rejection of all divine messages. The moral of this story is that there was one particular man among the people who accepted the message of truth. As a result of his acceptance and genuineness, he was persecuted and tormented. And Allah cites to us this story for us to draw lessons from this story. Lessons of resolve, lessons of steadfastness, and lessons of resilience in the face of tyranny and trial and oppression. Allah then goes on to speak about the 3 signs that He makes mention of that indicate His majesty, His existence, and His all-powering nature. The first thing He makes mention of is that He gives birth to the dead land, indicating that the same way He gives birth to a lamb that's lost life, He can give birth to a body that's also lost its soul, i.e., here He's referring to the resurrection that's going to occur post the day of judgment. The second sign Allah makes mention of is the alternation of night and day in this world, to teach us of His majesty, of His power, of His might, of His grandeur. And then the last sign Allah makes mention of is the intellect that He's bestowed upon human beings, for them to be able to create and innovate things using the faculties that He's provided them with. And all of these things, they call for one thing, and that's a thankfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah then goes on in the next chapter, which is Safat. The chapter of Safat, the name is drawn from the literal word saf, when you stand in rows. The same way we stand saf by saf in the mosque in ranks and rows in an organized fashion, the angels have a similar standing with Allah Azza wa Jal in the next world. So here Allah is describing to us the manner in which the angels stand before Him, out of submission and subserviency and loyalty. Allah starts off by making mention of the nature of jinn and angels. He starts off by mentioning that angels have been assigned varying duties and tasks. Some angels, they sit by the sleeping person. Some angels, they record our good deeds and bad deeds. Some angels, they sit by the pathways, recording the steps that people take towards good or bad. Each angel has a distinct task that he's been commanded divinely to carry out in this world. Then Allah goes on to mention the jinn. How the jinn, they try to steal knowledge from the angels and they are repelled. And Allah gives the analogy of a fire that's been thrown out and it's bursting as a result of being flogged out of an area it's not invited, it's not welcomed. Here Allah speaking about the jinn kind, that they have the ability to gain knowledge that they don't rightfully have the access to. But Allah describes them as weak creatures, creatures that don't stand very strong in the face of Allah's worship and in the face of His majesty. Allah then describes the jinn to be people who will also be taken into account on the Day of Judgment, the same way human beings are taken into account. Allah continues in Safat to make mention of the stories of many, many prophets who came before us. The story that's made mention of in the most detail in this impactful chapter is the story of our father Ibrahim alayhi salam. Allah makes mention of the sacrifice that he made, where he was told to sacrifice his son. And it's very important we give context to this impactful story. Not only did he sacrifice his son, he sacrificed the very son he gained after years of patience, after years of not being able to have a child. And when he was given a child, and he barely bonded with that child, but he developed a very strong sentimental attachment to this child, Allah commanded him to slaughter that child. And Ibrahim, he succumbed to Allah's commandment. And not only did Ibrahim accept the commandment and the order of Allah, but his son, despite being very young and tender in age, he also accepted the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, if this is what Allah wants, سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الصَّابِرِينَ. You will find me among the patient ones. Teaching us once again that in the face of Allah's desire, in the face of Allah's laws, in the face of Allah's commandments, our desires, our whims, they mean nothing. Allah then goes on towards the end of this chapter to speak more in depth about some of the horrors of the Day of Judgment, some of the events that will occur towards the end of time. The next surah is Surah Sad. The letter Sad is very much exclusive to this chapter, this section of the Qur'an. There's no other surah in the Qur'an that begins with the letter Sad. This is the only one. So it's quite unique in that sense. And we've discussed in previous sessions that these are known as miracle letters, meaning they have no particular meaning, but they serve a very unique purpose. The reason why these letters are placed in the beginning of sections within the Quranic discourse is to indicate to the Arabs who this book was sent to, that this book is indeed part and parcel of Arabic letters. It consists of the very letters that you use to compose your poetry and your speeches. Because the Arabs did not believe that this was the Arabic language. Given its rhetorical devices, its eloquence, the elegant meanings, the Arab couldn't accept that this was a speech that consisted of Arabic letters. Hence Allah further solidifies that this is indeed a speech that consists of Arabic letters. In this particular chapter, Allah once again starts off by talking about the creation, the skies, the mountains, all to bring human beings closer to the reality of worshipping one God. And not only the reality of worshipping one God, but the reality of who is truly deserved of worship. That upon pondering upon our surroundings, we come to the intellectual conclusion that there's only one being worthy of worship. And that's the one who created everything that we can see with our eyes. Allah then goes on to make mention of the story of Dawood alayhi salam. He makes mention of an incident that occurred where Dawood was presented with two people. And both of these two people, they possessed female sheep. One possessed 99 female sheep, the other possessed one. And it was a case that Dawood had to exercise his intellect in. And in the beginning, Dawood, he believed the person who possessed more female sheep, given that this person seemed to be the one who was telling the truth. And then he was corrected and realized that he shouldn't have been hasty in his judgment. So it's a story teaching us to always be impartial. Always seek the other side of the story. Never look at what seems to be the truth, but rather look for what actually is the truth. Allah then goes on to make mention of the story of Ayyub alayhi salam towards the end of this chapter. And the Prophet Ayyub, peace be upon him, went through some of the most significant trials and tribulations in his life. He was given wealth in abundance, he was given crops, he was given assets, he was given healthy children, and he was given a supportive, loving wife. And Shaitan wanted to trial this man. He wanted to snatch away the very faith that was embedded within his heart. So everything was one by one taken away from Ayyub alayhi salam. His houses were set on fire, his businesses were completely obliterated, his children one by one were taken away from him, they passed away. His health deteriorated significantly to such an extent that he wasn't able to even walk around. He became immobile and bedbound. Then when he wasn't able to walk, he possessed no wealth or assets, he had no healthy children. Allah trialed him through his spouse. His wife was then selling her hair to gain money for them to sustain themselves. He went through some of the most indescribable tests and trials. And here his story is narrated, where he says to Allah after years of enduring hardship and pain, that oh Allah, harm has afflicted me. I ask you for ease and alleviation. And this is a story that teaches us the importance of exercising patience in the face of test and trial. That regardless of how much difficulty we go through, it's crucial that we contrast our pain with all the blessings Allah has given us in our lives. Compared to the food that He's given us for years and years, compared to the housing that He's provided us with for years and years, a few years of suffering is nothing compared to the things that He's given us Jalla Jalalu. The next surah is Surah Al-Zumr. Al-Zumr literally refers to groups. And the reason why it's taken the name Zumr is because in this chapter, Allah speaks of two groups of people. One is the people of paradise, and the second is the people of hellfire. And Allah makes mention of some very intricate details of those who will rejoice in the hereafter. Those who will have rooms in paradise in which they will enjoy all the provisions Allah has very carefully prepared for them, their likes and their dislikes. And also the group of people who will be in the hellfire, and they will eat from a tree that's similar to a poisonous cactus tree, az-zaqum. And Allah speaks about this tree in quite some depth. And in fact, in other chapters in the Qur'an, like Al-Waqi'ah, there are other details mentioned about this tree. One of the details mentioned is the people who will consume the poison and the disgusting substances that will stem from this tree. They're reported to have been inflicted with a disease known as al-him. And this particular disease, it's actually known in our day and age as a disease that camels can contract. And it's when the camel, it tells itself it's thirsty and continues to drink excessively despite the fact that internally it's not able to contain any more water. And it results in self-destruction, self-implosion completely. And these people will continue consuming from this tree, this cactus tree that's detrimental, it's filthy, it's unhealthy. They'll continue consuming from this tree up until it results in their own destruction. The only thing is in the hereafter, everything is eternal. And that process will repeat itself. We ask Allah for safety. So Allah speaks of this reality in Surah Al-Zumr, and it's only a portion of Surah Al-Zumr mentioned in Juz 23. The remainder will be mentioned in Juz 24. Just some of the lessons that we can draw from Juz 23. The first lesson that we learn is the importance of standing by the truth irrespective of who stands with us. The first story that's mentioned in Surah Yasin with respect to the people of the village, wherein 3 messengers were sent over the course of centuries, there was only one man who accepted the message that these messengers were divinely sent with. And that man was persecuted and tormented. But irrespective of all the troubles he went through in pursuit of the truth, he still remained steadfast upon that. And that's one of the things that we'll find is a challenge in a Western liberal society, where working in certain workplaces, going to schools, being in places of education, we find ourselves in a position where we're often forced and pressured into accepting certain values. And it's crucial we remember these stories in the face of those troubles and those hurdles, that we should always stand by the truth, always stand by the religious values and principles that have been passed down to us by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second lesson we learn is the importance of reflecting upon the sufferings of the prophets who came before us. There are many lessons that we can draw from the suffering of Ayub, the suffering of Ibrahim, the suffering of Musa, the suffering of Nuh alayhi wassalam. And this is the very reason why their stories are not only told to us again and again, but the very same stories are repeated to us within one chapter again and again because of their relevance and their pertinence. And the last lesson, and I've mentioned this before, is the importance of having an interactive relationship with the coming of the hour. When we think about the Day of Judgment, it shouldn't be something we read in like these fairy tale books where it's something that may or may not happen. Rather, we should have certainty that this day, its events are being foretold. This day is inevitably going to occur. What have I prepared for this day? Reflect upon the horrors. Reflect upon the standing before Allah. Reflect upon the day wherein our deeds will be weighed rigorously, and we will be given a conclusive decision as to whether we are going to be inhabitants of the fire or inhabitants of paradise. This is something that we should every single day reflect over. And through reflecting upon these things on a daily basis, the hereafter becomes our focal point. And the love for this life slowly begins to fizzle away in our eyes. We ask Allah for tawfiq, and we ask Him to connect our hearts to this book and allow us to act upon knowledge we learn. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأتوب إليه.